So tonight I have the pleasure of introducing a speaker on a topic that I think is really important and crucial in this moment, which is creativity. So a reflection on creativity and its importance in the world and the ways in which it feeds sort of every field, right? So this talk tonight is part of the La Pietra Dialogue series, which is ongoing, and I invite everyone to go onto La Pietra Dialogue's page and look at all the different talks that there are. And, select some or try to come to all according to your own schedules. I'm going to give a little quick publicity for the next talk before we get into this because it's actually quite linked. And it's a talk that is, you guys maybe have this handout in your own hands, but it is on the 26th, which is Wednesday, at 6 p.m., right here in Villa Sassetti. And it's Julie Samuels, founder and executive director of Tech NYC, and it's a conversation on technology and creativity. So I invite you guys to come in here. Maybe it's an appropriate follow-up to the conversation that we're going to have tonight. So tonight I'm just going to introduce really briefly with a formal introduction Adama. And so here tonight we have Adama Sanneh from the Moleskine Foundation. He graduated in linguistic and cultural meditation from the University of Milan. He worked for several years in East Africa on rural development and humanitarian emergency programs. He obtained a Master in Public Management from the Bocconi School of Management and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Geneva. After graduating, he worked as a management and strategy consultant for various public and not-for-profit organizations, among which the United Nations, in education, social entrepreneurship, and innovation. As the co-founder and COO of the Moleskine Foundation, he is committed to promoting and advocating a more profound understanding of the African continent, focusing on the role that art and culture can play in this social change. I met Adama some time ago through mutual friends, just sort of having conversations around the kind of strategies for reorganizing culture within the context of Italy, which I think is something that, again, is really pressing and important that we design new strategies to think about the kinds of conversations we can have and the role that creativity can play within those. So tonight we'll sort of dive into some of that through the Moleskine Foundation. He's going to talk a little bit about sort of the origins of this foundation and its growth out of a previous organization that was called Lettera 27. All in Milan. And hopefully through that conversation, you'll get a little bit of a sense of how it's structured, its relation to Moleskine itself, and then what the objectives are. I have a few questions I'm going to walk him through in conversation, and then we'll sort of open up for questions towards the end. So everyone, join me in welcoming Adama here.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Look, thanks a lot for being here. Even if you were forced to. I still appreciate it. You can figure some of them. Some of them. No, thanks a lot, Justin. Just one thing, because there was like, my BA is in cultural mediation, not meditation. That would be cooler, like interesting, but I'm not exactly. And the MBA was in Geneva. Yeah. It would have been more interesting, probably, more fun to do, food-wise, to do in Geneva, but it was in Geneva. So today I'll try to talk a little bit about this idea of creativity for social change and how this we try to incorporate into the Moleskine Foundation. But I want to start with a super quick video, just to warm it up and introduce everything. when we started, and we decided to create the Moleskine Foundation, we started from a question that sounded a little bit naive at the time, but still quite relevant, we thought. And the question was, can creativity change the world? We didn't know. I don't know. We started thinking. We started arguing. And of course, because the first answer they all had, it was like, of course, that's the right thing. That's okay. But how do you really can find a way to give some substance to this? Because the tricky here sometimes that when you speak about things like creativity, you often speak with people that already are like-minded like you, and say like, oh, creativity, oh, for sure, that's the thing. But how can we make this argument a little bit stronger also to people that maybe say like, no, I don't believe that creativity can change the world. Maybe there's something else. So we started to do some research and we started to work a little bit on it. And so we came out with this curve to try to explain what we mean by saying that creativity can change the world. So this is a curve that shows about the acceleration of growth in technology in the past, in this case, 700 years, but this can go down 3,000 years. So basically, the curve says that since 50 years ago, more or less, the progression in technology was extremely slow. So the curve is almost flat, And in that phase, the amount of I would say innovation was quite limited, or the amount of disruptive innovation is quite limited. This means that there could be, as I wrote here, a focus on execution. So the type of skills that human beings would need in order to be effective in society were quite different. Where hard skills, where linear thinking could be applied, because something that we would have learned in high school, it would still be relevant in your job as a director. It would still somehow work, more or less. But something changed in the past 50 years. The acceleration of technology has been so steep that the curve is basically, a straight line. This means that in this era, we cannot predict the future, because in any moment there could be a disruptive innovation that changed completely the way we operate. And in this case, the skills needed for to be not just an innovator, not just be like a revolutionary, not just be like a change maker, but just to be an active and conscious citizen are different. In the beginning, till 50 years ago, again, focus on execution, hard skills were the most important skills. Now, we have to look at creativity. That's why we think that we are in a creativity era. And under creativity, we put it as a larger umbrella to talk about and to mention a number of soft skills that can be considered as critical thinking, empathy, creative doing, and lifelong learning. Now, until, whoever is here that is a little bit older than you guys, knows that until 10 years ago, 5 years ago, if you were talking about creativity and empathy, in education, they would look at you like you are a little bit like new age hippie guy that want to, come up with some weird esoteric solution. Now, these are the skills that even the United Nations recognize officially by saying, okay, we got to work on this. We don't know how, but we got to work on this. And this is really, we can see this in so many different aspects, in the last World Development Report, they were talking about a learning crisis. The skills that we have and we develop in some schools, not all of them, in some schools, they not match with the workforce, with what is needed in the workforce, and so it is fundamental to shift, the look into these soft skills and consider that these are extremely important, because we need to be more and more able to adapt and keep innovating in order to keep up with technology and society. And again, here there are a few examples. You can read them through. I think one of the interesting one, in your position and in our position is the one that IBM, the global CEO, studies that showcase that most of the CEOs says that creativity is the most important skills for them. You know, it's not about, you don't have to be like the top engineer, you don't have to be the top software developer, you don't have to be the top economist, you have to be somebody who is able to work in team, to think critically, and to adapt, and to problem solving, and to do problem solving. And to do this, you need to have creativity. That's pretty much the idea. So with the foundation, we kind of went through this. We were really convinced by the fact that, okay, this is something that we believe that we can contribute a little bit, that we can help out, that we can figure out solutions in order to improve the situation. Because what happened here is that the technological clock goes a lot faster than the social and cultural clock in society, you know? Technology goes 3, 4 times, 5 times, 10 times faster than how society and system need to adapt to that. So there is a need of, in every time there is like a sort of change of era, you know, there is a need of many stakeholders that decide to contribute to make this change faster. And, you know, with our small contribution, with a little bit, you know, with our effort, with our small effort, we try to accelerate that clock. And we want to work with institutional education that is already, you know, working a lot and striving to bring these new skills as you know, more important in their programs, but we try to get, you know, next to them and to try to figure out new tools and processes that can foster those 3 main skills that we mentioned before: critical thinking, creative doing, and lifelong learning.
If you go back one, there's one word that's in that mission that I wanted to ask you to go a little bit deeper into, because I think it's really important. So within this, it says that you're providing unconventional educational tools. And that's always something that in reading your mission statement that struck me as intriguing, also because it's an abstract, right? And so how do you define unconventional educational tools, and how are you guys using them? Just in terms of also thinking about this mission and the ways in which you're actually applying it, because I think that's what you're also leading towards.
Yeah, I'm glad that worked, because it took us forever to come out with unconventional educational tools. We use the word unconventional because we knew that we need to figure out, use this word improperly, like new solution, or that you need to have like a different approach to try to face the same problem. You know, that in the end of the day is, you know, the education of youth, you know, and the growth of youth. So the idea, the word unconventional for us, it was extremely important because we didn't want to use the word like innovative, you know, because we don't always have to innovate. You know, a lot of innovation, or something that also nowadays it is passive innovation, was already being conceived like 50, 60, 100, 2,000 years ago. You know, so it's not necessarily about focusing on innovation. I think there's a little bit of bias, it's a little bit of problem, improper use of the word innovation. But unconventional just means that it's not mainstream. Maybe it was in our pocket, it was a solution, it was in our pocket, you know, but we forgot about it. You know, we didn't consider it, you know. So the idea of unconventional is really to start to try to think about the problem from different point of views and then come out with possible solution. The other word that is important is the idea of tools. We can talk about it a little bit more later with some of the programming concrete examples, but what are the courses here? What do you study? What do you study? Comparative literature. Okay, so if I cite Deleuze, something comes to mind, more or less. More or less. So there's an interesting, very interesting philosopher. Now it's a lot of problem connected to it lately, but Gilles Deleuze was talking about this idea of having a toolbox for education. So considering education as a toolbox, as something where you accumulate and you try to refine your tools. And then the main responsibility of the educator is to give you enough tools so then you can go to that tools anytime you have an issue, anytime you have to face your life going on, professional, personal, and so on and so forth, and go to those tools. So the idea is to figure out a way to provide those tools. That's what good education institutions do. It's about giving tools. So the idea of putting unconventional and tools, it's kind of, focus, I think, in an interesting way, our mission, and the fact that, we try to really focalize with the little resources that we have, and I think is the area in which we can leverage our experience and knowledge on this. Well, yes, still institutional thing, but I think it's interesting. We focus on youth. It's important. And focus on communities affected by cultural and social deprivation. Something that I like here about this statement is that communities affected by cultural and social deprivation doesn't have to be necessarily in the south of the world. It doesn't have to be necessarily in a poor space. Cultural and social deprivation can happen in very rich areas. And one of the main features that I like about our foundation is the fact that we look at any communities that in this situation, and we provide the same type of tools if it is NYU, or if it is Harvard, or if it is like a small community in the middle of Chad. The service is the same. Now, we might ask you to pay, because you can, for that service, so that amount of money can go to the communities that cannot afford the same service. But it's important to say that in the end of the day, the tools are the same. The services, has to be the same. Well, this is just to say, this is the area in which we work. And the one that I would like to just mention is this idea of art and culture for social transformation, because it's connected to the main program that I wanted to share with you today. And this idea is simply to say that we look at art and culture as interesting tool to foster social transformation, as an interesting tools that we experienced in the past 10 years to really kind of get in depth and try to that often allow you to gain a different perspective compared to other more conventional tools. Well, this is to say how good we've been in the past 10 years and how many places we've been to. But this is the program that I wanted to mention, and I had a chance to chat with Justin about a couple of times. And the program is called AtWork, and the idea is that inspire a new generation of creative thinkers. And AtWork is an educational format. It's one of those unconventional tools that we created, and it's an immersive, in-depth experience that uses the creative process to stimulate critical thinking, in the participants. I like this. You say it helps youth to develop the intellectual and emotional skills necessary to develop both a personal and collective sense of identity. It's a big statement. We might exaggerate a little bit here, but this is our goal. We created this with this man that I think is worth mentioning because he's an important intellectual, and he's somebody who dedicated himself. Few people know that dedicated himself to education, because he's very well known as an international curator. You can argue that Simone Jaime is one of the father of contemporary African art, whatever that means. But he's been one of the first people who put contemporary African art in mainstream. I just digressed a little bit, but just to give you a reality check. Before people like Simone Jaime, Ocrian Wezer, Bizi Silva, Salah Hassan, and a few others existed, contemporary African artists, like, for example, Abdoulaye Konaté, that is one of the great masters from Mali, he said he used to show his art into natural history museums. That was the only place where they would give an African person a space to showcase their art. So it was just after, a certain movement. Of course, I'm simplifying a little bit, like a complex history, but it was after a moment, after people like Simone, who really like contemporary African art, got into the mainstream, and now we have great example also in Resinification, and many, many, many others. But, in the past years, we've been a little bit around. It's an itinerant format, so the program started in Africa, and then it spread. It went also like in the Western world, in South America. And we tried to create and build a community of students who've been through this. But this is a little bit what we were saying, what I was mentioning before about the toolbox. And somehow also the tools and the instruments that we wanted to use in order to create the AtWork format. We say we use these three elements, that is Africa, notebooks, and community. And we use it, with a little bit with a strong poetic license, right? Let me start with this idea of the notebook. So you have to imagine AtWork is a format that really starts with a notebook. So the first thing, students come, in order to apply, they have to answer or comment to a theme. The theme could be, for example, this year was I Had a Dream. When we were in Zimbabwe, we made it, our theme was Can Revolution Be a Whisper? When we did it in Kampala was Should I Take Off My Shoes? In Addis Ababa was What is Home? So a very broad theme. And the first thing that we ask to students is, okay, what is your interpretation of it? What's your answer? After that, you come to the workshop and you receive a notebook. The idea is that this notebook becomes yours and you register the process that happened in the 5 days of strong discussion with a strong workshop leader. And in the end of the day, in the end of the process, when after that you have, interpret the theme, when you express yourself, when you discuss with the other people in the workshop, when you discuss with a workshop leader, when you really try to go in depth in your own emotion, knowledge, and so on and so forth, you have to produce an artist notebook, a physical object. And this is important because a notebook is an incredible tool to register emotions. It is something that, we kind of lose our capacity of using our hands, and again, sometimes like when we say this, it takes like right away this very romantic feeling, say like, we don't do this anymore. No, this has scientific basis. When you type on a computer and when you write on a piece of paper, you use a different part of your brain. And you use a brain, when you write, you use a part of your brain that is connected to your emotions, that is connected to your memory. So by exercising this, by doing this, you basically working on a part of yourself that often we don't exercise enough, And the results is quite interesting. It's quite incredible. Because again, writing, a notebook is connected to writing, and writing is connected to time. And time is connected to memory and emotions, So the notebook is an incredible, powerful tool to try to get into this education space in this way. The other element that we use is Africa. And that's a big deal, it's very complicated words when you say Africa, because what does that mean? What are we referring to? I personally wouldn't be able to define it. But in this case, we try to use it by saying that the African space, let's put it this way, in this moment, it's an incredible laboratory of innovation, and it's an incredible laboratory to rethink ourselves and rethink society at large. First of all, it's the youngest continent on the planet. I think the average age is now 19, or maybe it's even lower than that. So it's a continent for the future, practically. And second of all, it's a space where the infrastructure, the cultural infrastructure is more, I would say, are more fine-tuned to contemporaneity. What I mean by that? I mean that society at large now in the Western world is living like a strong crisis, cultural crisis. Like the idea of a nation state is shaken because of migration, because of technology, because of the world is getting smaller, and so on and so forth. The issue related to identity, it's much more complicated. And, and in the space of Africa, because of the way history went, and I don't want to delve in it, everybody has a multiple identity. Anybody has a complexity, has a contradiction that lives within itself, and there is the possibility to create new language. That is one of the most important things. And one of the things that education, and especially when it's done through art, can create language. Because language, of course, we need language to produce thoughts, and we need thought to produce action. We don't have to quote, anybody here, but many philosophers talk about it, starting from Hegel. But the idea is that, language is crucial. The creation of language is crucial in this field. And the last part is the idea of community. The idea is that, okay, we do this, but we deal with students, but how does it work? We come, we deal with one student, then we go away. No, the idea is that we need to create a community where this discourse can be amplified. And especially we need to create a community where the direction of dialogue are not necessarily, as often happen, north-north or north-south, but is south-south, south-north, geographically, in terms of discussion. And creating this, can really can create a context in which new dialogue might happen. We don't know what might happen. We don't want to have like a strict control of the community, but it's interesting to set up a situation in which possibility might happen. I feel I'm talking too much. You deter me. I get.
It's hard to interrupt. You're really going. But I think that a lot of what you're talking about in terms of the construction of language and the necessity of the construction of language, I think that when you think artistically about the construction of language, there's like this whole other open door as to what we're referring to. The ways that we construct language in terms of writing, especially when we sort of take a more artistic license in writing, is not the way we tend to be taught to construct language. And when you add to that visual art, the language that we're able to construct is a completely different open field.
Yeah.
And it's an open field where I think there's a long-standing history and tradition, but as you said, there's unconventional ways to engage in the construction of language that happen quite naturally in the notebook and in through art, and I think also mainly through slowing down, which I think is also something that you guys are engaging in through the notebook itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that we have seen that is interesting that we could do through AtWork is the fact that we can go to countries, and that often, we go to countries that there is a censored society, so it's complicated politically, and we end up discussing with students about topics that are completely taboo. For example, when we went to Uganda, simply by the theme, should I take off my shoes, it came out like a strong discussion about homosexuality. Because one of the participants, had her coming out a few years back, and she felt that there was the time to discuss with everybody else. And it came out like a very strong discussion and interesting discussion, and everything was possible just because we entered through the art, quote unquote, angle, because if we would have go to Uganda and we would have done like a policy-related workshop about homosexuality, we would have landed, then it would have taken, Mr. Sanneh, you can go back, I would have taken the next flight and come back to Milano. That's what would have happened. And even if we would have been able to land this workshop, it would have been like a very top-down type of Western-centric type of discourse, because of course you come here, you come with your ideas, you think that this is the right thing to talk about, and you take it from a politics perspective, political and so on and so forth, and that is one way of looking at things. But that doesn't allow necessarily for youth like you to open up and having the chance to discuss at the same level. And that would happen through the workshop, because this student had the chance to through her notebook to tell her story. And it was a personal story. It was in a situation in which other people, the other 30 students that were with her, also showcased their personal story. But it is important that, again, this happened in a way, in a format where this dialogue could happen. You know, it could happen in an effective way. You know, and so in the end, this is one of the. You know, they say that education. Sometimes people argue that. Some experts argue that education is mainly a design issue. It's the way how you design an experience. So how you create the context in which certain things might arise. You know. There's Simone Jaime actually talks about it in a more poetic way, you know, when they quote Levinas and they say, you know, we have nothing to teach to anybody. Our goal is to try to extract the light that is in every person, you know, and that's pretty much the idea. And so AtWork is an experience that kind of want to create this space. And it does it through a very, though, and this is important, a very rigorous structure, you know, that has, and a format that has a workshop, that has an exhibition, that has a community, and it has a collection.
I think that, you know, one of the things that is really fundamental, I had the opportunity, fortunately, of visiting one of the AtWork workshops that was in Rome, and getting a sense of the context in which things were being created and what kinds of conversations were being generated. And I think that a lot of one thing, removing education from the classroom on occasion is also a really helpful way to dive into the creative field without some of the things that I think are sort of structures that are taken for granted within a more institutional environment. And so this setting outside of the schoolroom, I think, is also a really perfect example of what happens when you sort of remove those boundaries and you sit down in a room and have a real conversation and allow people the opportunity to really express their thoughts. And I always say that creativity a lot of times is about creating an environment where people feel comfortable getting uncomfortable. When we're all uncomfortable in the same room, somehow there's a comfort in that, right? That sort of openness that it generates.
Absolutely. You know? I was thinking that if you bear with me, I wanted to show you a video, a 3-minute video that showcases about how AtWork works. So you can see some images, you can see the process, and you don't have to hear me talking. And, well, actually in the video it's still me talking, so it's still, you know, but still.
A tighter soundbite.
Exactly. Let's see if it's here. Okay. Let me show you this. AtWork is the product of 4 years of discussion, attempts, works with Simone Jaime, but also with artists, intellectuals, educators, and students who are trying answering the same question. How can we create a tool in support of institutional education that too often lack focus on such fundamental skills as critical thinking? We want to create an intense, transformative experience for young creative talents and students, a moment where they can question themselves, the norms, the schemes, get out of the comfort zone, and eventually be willing to transform the society around them. This is an experience that was born in Africa, and Africa is a perfect metaphor for the world. It is the youngest continent in the world, and it represents a space in which to think about the future and set new standards.
The AtWork format has 3 key moments: a workshop, an exhibition, and a community. The workshop brings top artists and intellectuals to lead a discussion with the creative talent on a specific topic. As a result of collective discussion and self-reflection, each participant personalizes a notebook, which solidifies the process in an art piece. The exhibition is an opportunity for them to showcase their works and to extend a dialogue to a larger audience. AtWork Online Community is the space where the sharing takes the conversation to a global level and goes beyond a single workshop experience. The notebooks then become part of the Moleskine Foundation collection that we promote in various international venues, as well as in the permanent online show. The variety of pieces is really impressive, and they treat such topics as identity, diversity, memory, freedom, and many others.
At the beginning, it was intimidating. It required a lot of thinking of how do I get out of what I have learned, how do I unlearn what I have learned already. Everything was gone, like everything I knew before had to go away, and I had to do something new this time around.
We grew up in an education system where we weren't allowed to think for ourselves, we weren't allowed to question, we weren't allowed to have an opinion. The only place where criticality is occurring is in the art world, and that's so important.
With AtWork, we want to create an interconnected Pan-African network of cultural influencers and youth. This unique community of creative thinkers can have an impact that goes way beyond a single workshop. Right.
So I think that you know, in terms of the conversation on creativity and the use of these tools is something that also can be extended into a broader conversation. And Adama has a lot of different, he wears a lot of different hats literally and then also professionally. And I think that there's ways in which the kinds of creative strategies which this work revolves around is something that he's also involved in employing directly in all these different fields, you know, so through contemporary art and his work around a contemporary art gallery and elsewhere. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like the other facets of your jobs and your application of creativity within those other fields. And I think also more specifically the ways in which this becomes language and technical approaches and everything that extend beyond a lot of what, that include a lot of what the educational environment is meant to give you, but with what so often is sort of falls short.
One of the elements that we focus a lot is about this idea of lifelong learning and this idea of, you know, and again, an unconventional tools. And I think it's important because when I was a student, I didn't realize how important it was to start fostering a strong relationship with knowledge outside your classroom. You know, it was, you know, it is one of those things, you know, that for so long, you know, growing up, you know, and I started, you know, a little bit, and you know, and most of the time I was entering in with this idea of like, okay, I enter in this system, this is the type of things that I have to do. I can recognize a hierarchy. I can recognize exactly what are the things that I have to do in order to be successful. I was, you know, relatively smart, so, you know, it wasn't that difficult. But if I could realize how that would have helped me in the real world completely different if I would have approached it in a much 360 degrees way to say like, okay, now I have an opportunity to delve into knowledge in general. And I have the next 15 years of my life where the only thing that I can do is experimenting, learning, you know, not only for a mark, not only for a degree, but just, you know, as a human being. You know, I think it would have been, you know, I would have been so much better, you know, if somebody would have told me this. And because I'm thinking whether I should provoke you or not, but go for it. We noticed something with AtWork, and most of this, our workshop leader noticed this. And of course it's a provocation, but we realize that every student that comes in with a mentality of being a student from an institution is fundamentally stupid. Because the moment that you take him or her out of the institution and you say like, okay, now it's you. There's no hierarchy anymore that I can relate to. There's no, the buzzwords that normally work with some of your teachers don't work anymore out there. And you need to figure out things for yourself. And look, and when I had this conversation with some of the CEOs that we deal with the foundation, and I say the same thing. And most of the people say like, every professional, every manager often is fundamentally stupid when you start thinking within that box. So now the issue is, and this is like one of the main things that creativity and unconventional tool for education can give us, is to give this exercise to keep going out of that box. And so be able to gain the right perspective into whatever task we need to do. Because the trap of the box is always there, and it happens to everybody, and it is something also important that this is the same thing, and knowledge and creativity is the same. We all were born with creativity in us, We lose it growing up. Because most of the education institutions, society, whoever is around us that could mentor us, often, just suppress it, And so it is our duty as an individual for ourselves to keep working on it in the same way that we go to the gym, And that's pretty much the thing. And that's something that we try to capture in this program. And this is something that now, a little bit later, in my life, I try to do personally, so that's why I'm trying to be engaged, in different initiatives that has creativity at the center. And yes, just you mentioned the gallery space that
I would
are
say
open.
also the sort of alternative strategies to community development. I know that you have, I don't know what you call your informal meetings at your place, but I think that's a real particular kind of community building and worth sort of mentioning in terms of how you create a space for rich conversation outside of an institutional structure in just your personal time.
Yeah, I mean, for that is just by really like being a bit strategic with your own passions and with your own goals. If you try, I mean, at least for me, when I started to think about it, and I wanted to, and I had this passion, this interest, and both, first of all, and I'm saying this, in a very clear way, starting from a personal interest, so starting from simply a personal interest, both in terms of passion and personal development. So I don't want to pass like, oh, I had this, big heart and big ideas to revolutionize the world. It started from me, and then I realized that starting from me, then, it would, again, like a lot of option in my life and personal interest in dealing with others and create conversation that will grow, in size in a way. And then what I've tried to do is to be strategic with the possibilities that came under, in front of my eyes. And fun enough, the foundation was one of those, because before I was used to work for the UN, and it was a great job, because, okay, now you're probably too young, but I can assure you that a tax-free Geneva salary is something that can make you feel very well in the end of the month. But at the same time, it's not only about that. And so because the risk, the UN has a lot of great things, but at least from my experience, I was, a little bit limited by the number of red tape that a huge institution had and how little change you can affect individually in this. So then I decided to go in a smaller organization and try to have and to grow something within the values that I believed in and this idea that I believed in. Then it happens that because of my passion, because of my network, because of my travels, because of my studies, I had the opportunity to open an art gallery, and I did it. But I didn't want to open an art gallery. I wanted to use an art gallery as a tool for engaging the community, to bring new narratives to Milan, to the city of Milan. But also, it was, the same thing I did it with AFER, that is I would say, a network of young Afro-Italians, and have a space to create a dialogue among us. But something that to me is important here and I feel that I want to share with you is the aspect of strategy. I have an MBA, and so it's important that all of these things come into a structure at some point. We don't have to be naive about it. The gallery is an art gallery. We need to figure out a way to be sustainable. Even if I have all my mission and my community interests and so on and so forth, if we created a gallery, we need to make money at the end of the day, because otherwise we'll disappear. So it is important I think, to figure out a way to connect your strategy, your skills with your passion, and try to go on with it. Yeah.
So we talked about the education, the creativity, the moving with, but the connection to that ultimate social transformation. Creativity is a tool for creating critical thinking skills, etc. Can you talk more about your views on creativity being a driver of social change?
Even in the video, there is this idea about the ability of thinking. Try to foster this ability of thinking. And I think that, nowadays in this society, it's more and more important, because there's an overflow of information, and critical thinking as a skill. And another word that it came out in the last report, scientific report that we did on AtWork, that is called metacognition skills. That is, well, but it's, this idea of recognizing how you think. So you have a look at yourself, you think, okay, I'm thinking in this way. It's an antidote to part of the complexity that society now is imposing on us. Therefore, if we increase the ability of thinking in society, in youth, then I think is one of the antidote to everything that is from fake news, to dealing with fake news and fake information, to anything else down the line. Now, we look at now, and we look at a little bit the situation, without going too much political. But if we look at the society around us, intolerance is increasing. Racism actions are increasing. And I can only speak, for example, for Europe, because that's the part that I know best. Nationalism are increasing. And the problem of that is that most of these starts from a fake story or a fake narrative, or just something that is, factually incorrect, So for us, the interest in focusing on that, it comes for two reasons. Why? The first thing is say, okay, we want to focus on this because the international community asks stakeholders to focus on this, because there is a lack of research. The second thing is that, okay, we believe that this is the task because we've seen around the world more and more this element, this lack of these skills, compared to what society is proposing us. And we need to figure out ways to improve those skills. Because this is not something that is important for us. Nowadays you have a lot of organization and foundation that they say, like, we're going to do this to foster the new generation of change makers, the new generation of leaders. That is fantastic. But here we're talking about these skills now are basic skills to just be a conscious citizen. You can be a baker, you can, own a restaurant. You don't have to be prime minister in order to, or you don't have to be like the biggest entrepreneur. We need to figure out a way to democratize these skills. And so with the foundation and with our goal is to really try to focus on that and focus and figure out programs. And there is a lot of research to do. We don't have the answers, of course, but how to figure out to do this and try to make it at a scale where we can figure out to democratize those skills. When that would happen, it will be connected to social change. This is in the Western world. But we've seen in Sensuous Society, in the video there is Eba Amin, who's a great artist from Egypt, is also saying, in Cairo, for example, we're in Cairo, we're in Addis Ababa, art and creativity were literally the only space where any form of criticality could occur. And again, criticality is connected to language, and language is connected to thought, and thought is connected to actions. It's not a case that most of Sensuous Society, the first things that they do, they work on, they close out art spaces, and they close out gallery spaces, and they work on language. It's a clear, it's a normal pattern. And so this is our way that we think that it's important to resist and to figure and to foster social change for the future.
Yeah, there's a quote, and I'm forgetting who said it, which is really kind of terrible, but it's a good quote. And it says that we spend the first years of childhood development and education teaching our children and holding their hand and guiding them to learn language and to talk and to walk and to engage in this world. And then we spend the rest of their lives teaching them to sit down and shut up. And this is sort of really evident also in just the structure of how classrooms are set up for childhood education, where in the earlier layers of that, creativity is fundamental. So if you go to any kindergarten, everything is about stimulating creativity. Everything is about stimulating language, about expressing our individual selves. And then as you sort of move into elementary school, just the structure of the classroom and the aesthetics of that classroom leads you in a different direction, and creativity is stimulated less and less as you move forward. I think in the university space we have a different kind of flexibility, but in terms of those crucial years of learning, really the aesthetics of the environment in which that takes place so often tells really clearly this story. And not to mention what you were saying, this sort of destabilizing and defunding of creativity, the debunking of its importance within institutions. That's sort of a crucial and fundamental way in which elements of social control take over, because there is no capacity for that criticality. There's no space for it. It's considered a wrong answer rather than something that has been accepted.
Yeah.
What are some exercises for creativity? Because people, I know people that literally came up to me and they're like, I'm not creative at all. How do I help them become creative? Or how do I even help myself become even more creative than I am right now? Or just...
Good question. I'm not sure. No, so the literature here is a bit contradictory. There's a when we started looking at this, especially through the scientific monitoring and evaluation of AtWork program, we haven't found a lot of conclusive things, but sketching, writing, are two great things to do. Registering your thoughts, it's important. Something that is also important is that when you take notes, for example, or you do sketch, this is not necessarily important because you have to go back and read them. Just the act of doing it, it basically stored that somewhere else, in your mind, and it allows you to think about it in a completely different way. you know. The other thing is also depends on like, what do they mean, what your friends mean by, you know, creativity, you know. Creativity is connected to, you know, what do they exactly want, you know, in terms of creativity? What do they mean? What do they have in their mind? It's about, you know, because sometimes it happens that they say like, oh, I want to be more creative, and so I should wear like a yellow jacket and pink shoes, you know. But if there is something else, there's one thing that I found always interesting. We had one of our advisor is one of the actually main researcher on critical thinking and creativity, and his name is Roberto Casati. And he always says this. He's very, you know, his vision is very strong, straight in one thing. He say like, creativity is a function of knowledge. So this is also an important thing. And this is something that normally artists appreciate this. Because creativity, yes, it is a skill that we have since we were born, and we need to keep trained. But creativity happens with knowledge. The examples that you can say is that Einstein, you know, was extremely creative, you know, in his own field, because he was an expert in his own field. So he managed to foster innovation and be creative in his own field. Einstein was also a musician, and he was a terrible musician. You cannot say that he was a creative musician, he was just a bad musician. So creativity and knowledge talk to each other, you know. When I say this normally in front of an audience of artists, they normally appreciate it a lot, because every time like people has an idea of like, oh, you're an artist, oh, you're so creative, you know, you're so lucky, you know, to be this creative and so on and so forth. You're like, well, actually I work 16 hours a day, you know, to be creative. So there are a few tools that you can use, using sketches, writing. It forces you to use a different type of your mind. It helps a lot. But in the end of the day, I also believe that creativity is a function of knowledge. So you can't separate the two things. So you want to be creative in the field, study. That's the idea.
Yeah, and I think that one thing I would add just really quickly to that is just that I find it helpful that the word creativity has so many misconceptions around it as well, that sometimes when we simply replace creativity with curiosity, it makes it so that people are more shy about saying that they're not creative by saying you're not curious about something, but that curiosity is about actually the desire to dig into something, and that's really crucial to creative thinking.
Yeah.
Hi. Earlier you were talking about the tools, and they were unconventional. And it was an interesting point you made that you didn't want to use the word innovative. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the difference between creativity and innovation in the idea of, can creativity change the world? Yeah.
In that case, I didn't want to use the word innovation because I think it is overused and used improperly. And I think that if you're looking from a societal perspective, every generation think that, you know, they're doing something new. They created something new, you know, while actually most of the time is not the case. But sometimes it is, you know, sometimes it isn't. But it doesn't matter, you know. And often, I think in the public discourse, there is again an overuse of the word innovation by saying that innovation has a value on its own. It hasn't. You know, what important is that is something that does this tool work or it doesn't? You know, who cares if it is a new tool or is it an old tool? Does it work or it doesn't? And also because, you know, we wanted to use the word unconventional also because of this, because we want also to force us to look back, you know, and see, okay, what are the things that we can, again, to look back in the case, and I connected to before, to look back in the sense that we still need to connect to the things of knowledge, you know. In order, you can have an unconventional approach, but in the end, and you can be creative, but in the end, this is connected to knowledge. So it's about doing your work and try to be focused on what you do. This is nothing, you know, that you just inherited, you know. It's something that you have to put some work on it. Forgot the last part of your question was regarding?
I guess just the difference between creativity and innovation in terms of the main goal of the foundation.
Yeah. Well, creativity is more a skill. You know, we try to use it as a skill. Probably an approach is more specific, but it's an umbrella skill that we try to have in order to then delve into all these other more specific skills that we linked before. And so, and because we think that, again, is connected to this idea of the era of creativity, is the era in which creativity is important in order to survive. That's pretty much the idea, you know. Without creativity, we simply won't be able to survive because we need to figure out a way, the solutions for the problems that are yet to happen. And it's always been like this. The difference now, these problems and this solution has to happen at a much quicker pace compared to the past.
I think also, I mean, in that comparison, I would think also, I view innovation as something where in order to innovate, you need a knowledge of a broad sense of what tradition is, what lies in the past. And instead, for unconventional tools, to be unconventional, you have to have a broad sense of what it means to be conventional in the first place. So that sort of, it requires that broad knowledge in order to be applied in both cases. So I think there is a good relation between them.
Is this working? Oh, I can't hear. Okay. My question was, when you were talking about opening a gallery and that you wanted it to be a place for new narratives and an engagement with the community, what was one of your biggest difficulties in trying to make that a reality and like in a place where people can come and?
Well, first of all, I'm still working on it. So I mean, the gallery exists, but I mean, you know, in order to make it develop and make it a bigger space, I'm sure that there's a lot of new challenges ahead of me. But I think the main challenge was, first of all, is always, on a practical terms, it was the team. Get the right people, you know, that you can make this vision a reality. And I was extremely lucky on this with my business partner to open the gallery. And that already was a big step ahead. You know, the moment that you find your team, the moment that you find your people that you want to do this, that's already like a big, big step ahead. The other element for me to try to create, in this case, was the opposite of the mission of the foundation. I want to make something mainstream, you know, and use mainstream, let's say, narrative tools, but with but I wanted to insert a new narrative in a stealth way. So, for example, you know, our gallery main focus on contemporary African art, you know, and for a few reasons. A, because this is what I know, so it wouldn't be serious for me to do anything else. Second of all, because I believe that it's a movement, you know, to not call it, because it's not a style, it's not, let's put a movement, but, you know, let's go for it. It's not precise, but, you know, that has a lot to say in this era. But for example, what I did is written nowhere that we focus on contemporary African art. I didn't want to put anywhere the adjective. I mean, I basically banned the adjective African, you know, to describe anything, you know, because you come to a gallery, you see an artist. You don't see an African artist. You see an art piece. You don't see like an African art piece, you know. And so, in this case, my strategy was to say, okay, you come, you're just a normal gallery. But the moment that you're in, you know, hopefully you can confront yourself with objects, with pieces that can touch different chords, you know, without you coming with a premeditated idea of what Africa is, and so on and so forth, you know. And the same thing could be Africa, the same thing could be with, you know, female artist. You know, it's an artist, you know. Then, so the issue here for me was to create a space in which, we could, you can start inserting, certain narrative, in a way that again, maybe like in an unconventional way, in the sense that where people can relate a little bit differently. That was the thing, and we're still working on it, and it's an ongoing process. But that's been so far what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Hi. So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned cultural and social deprivation. I was wondering if you could give more of a definition of what that is, considering your sites that you choose, and also, how do you choose the sites that you have the AtWork program?
So let me start from the, well, there's actually a very practical answer to that. So we are based in Milan. Our headquarters in Milan. We travel a lot. Everybody in the foundation travel a lot, but we're based in Milan. There is nothing that we do without a partner locally. Nothing. And that's for us is fundamental. The only thing that we can do in Milan is to make sure that we find the right partner. But then in terms of the knowledge locally, understanding which are the most important communities to deal with, what is the right strategy to use locally, it's always outsourced to the local organization. And local organization can be universities, can be cultural organizations, can be art and cultural centers. Now in Chad, we just had a workshop in Chad. Who knows what the capital of Chad is? Damn it. Well, I didn't know it either. Like I was when they say we're going to Chad, they said like we're going to N'Djamena. It's like where? And it's like capital of Chad is N'Djamena. It's a very interesting place. But we partner with the National Museum of N'Djamena. And that was extremely important because, they knew what was happening in the community. They knew what was happening, in the country. And so we had to, we basically work with them, and our main work was to work with them in order to create the best program. So to make a long story short, our strategy, it comes from our headquarters. We try to create a first circle of advisors that we believe that has more knowledge than us in the specific areas that we decide to work on. And as these advisors will defer to local organization that they believe that has more knowledge than them about the local community. So the idea is that it's a kind of knowledge research that we do so that the moment that we arrive to the decision, we made sure that the decision, it is primarily influenced by the stakeholders who has more knowledge regarding our end goal. I don't know if that answers your question.
The social deprivation. Yeah.
So what does it mean, social deprivation? That's a difficult question. I was trying to skip that because I don't know how to answer that. I could say that in our experience, in my experience, I don't have a clear definition to that. It is something that it takes different shape, a different form in the different spaces that we deal with. For example, what we've seen, for example, in Zimbabwe and in Uganda, for example, and especially in Uganda, there was something social and cultural deprivation. There was something connected to the complexity of a sensory society. Same thing in Addis Ababa, and in Cairo, actually. There was something connected to the fact that there was almost like a ceiling created by the state, to how much access can I have to knowledge, how much access do I have to criticality, how much access do I have to this. So it is important, it was the same thing actually in N'Djamena. So it was important for us to get in those spaces, and for us in this case, social and cultural deprivation meant not having access to something, to knowledge, to services, and so on and so forth. And that basically impacted a lack of criticality, lack of skills in this field, and then it would create a number of difficulties with intolerances and so on and so forth. In other spaces where we worked, when we work in Milan, when we work in Paris, when we work in Modena, when we work with, in bigger institutions, there was a similar situation in terms of a lack of criticality and lack of metacognition skills, meaning like also again, lack of capacity to really understand and interpret reality. But that was due sometimes like to an overflow of information, so not having necessarily the capacity to deal with all the tools that are out there, and then ultimately, will result into intolerances, lack of knowledge and skills into specific skills, lack of love for knowledge in general, lack of tools to really interpret and increase your level of information and consciousness. So it was, it varied from place to place. And I think we're still in the process to really figure out whether we can give like a clear definition of it. But I think it is important, but we don't have it yet. Now it is something that we just recognize, and that we recognize, and it is recognized by the partners that we work with. To make it an example, if we will ever do like an AtWork in NYU here, I will speak with you, we will speak with your professors, and say like, okay, what should we talk about? Where do you see the gap? Where do you see that element that you think, our students, or you say like myself and our peers should work on? And of course that will be very different when we do it in South Africa, or in Paris, but the process of AtWork kind of want to go in that way, so that every time we figure out a way, what is exactly that definition that you were asking me?
Hi. I'm
Hey.
wondering about some of the metrics of success that you use, some of the metrics that you're reporting back to your stakeholders, like how you're qualifying a successful AtWork process. And then also I'm wondering about the relationship that you have with Moleskine. Obviously the foundation it's named after Moleskine, and I want to know if the company has any leverage with you, and just how that relationship works, how you continue to stay independent, but keep in line with their CSR goals.
Yeah. So the first question I can answer with saying we're working on it, in a sense that now we have a number of processing tools that look at, of course, from pre-workshop surveys, post-workshop surveys, to really figure it out how that impacted, the students itself. And we have an ongoing monitoring and evaluation done externally by an external partners that try to look at the effect of AtWork in students. And for example, before I was briefly mentioned this idea that the methodology, it clearly impacted, critical thinking and metacognition processes. It is very hard to really come up with strong KPIs on that. And we are not the only one who's struggling with this. Measuring critical thinking, creativity, lifelong learning, these type of skills is extremely difficult. There are not many tools out there yet that can still satisfy, this need in its, comprehensively, So at the moment we are doing empirically, we do all these processes. We do our monitoring and evaluation. We have surveys, that tell us something, but that we're still in a phase in which we are working with also other institutions to figure out how to pass from this to clear KPI that we can measure, because it's difficult, because creativity and critical thinking is something that is extremely difficult to measure, especially because you need to measure in the short term, but the point is that to measure in the long term. So there's also like an issue of time connected to the survey of it.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Did you develop that in response to stakeholders asking for that information? Have you found that that's helpful, like starting to have those surveys in terms of staying sustainable?
No, we develop it out of our ethical code and our idea of improvement. You know, you can't improve any program unless you know what is happening. You know, so it is something, and also like we all, you know, in the foundation, there's myself coming from the UN side, but then you have also some other people coming from the business side, you know, and we were all like very much keen in getting KPIs, you know, and getting like, you know, those indicators that tell us that we're doing the right thing, you know, especially because now we want to scale. And if we want to scale, you need to know what you're dealing with, you know. So it came out of our need to make this bigger and more important. Relationship with Moleskine. So, thank you for the question. I wanted to get there. We have an interesting relationship with Moleskine. So, the Moleskine Foundation existed previously under a different name that briefly Justin mentioned. It's called Lettera 27. So it was an already existing organization that worked for 10 years in partnership with Moleskine also. It was one of the donors, you know, as simple as that. Then at some point we had the chance for a number of reasons to change the name of the foundation and becoming the Moleskine Foundation. Why that? Because we wanted to scale. We wanted to have bigger impact and we wanted to reach more people. And we thought that the Moleskine name could help us doing that. Because Moleskine, you know, among all the different brands that are out there, it's a cultural brand, and people has a different relation, you know, with it. You know, of course, if the opportunity would have happened with Total, it would have been completely different.
It's a gas station, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it would be completely different. You know, not because I have anything against Total. Well, I might have a few things against Total, but that's not the point. The point is that, you know, not because of that, but because it's just like, you know. The business case would have been different, you know? So we had this opportunity. So then what happened is that we wanted to keep our independence. But at the same time, we had the chance to deal with a very enlightened company that wanted to leave us our independence. And they wanted to leave us our independence because I think they're smart. And because they know that, that any activity in corporate social responsibilities has to be authentic, you know, not only for ethical reasons, and I take for granted that we all somehow on the same line on this, and so I wanted to underline something different. It's because you have to do that. When you look at data, you know, they showcase that consumers now, they are very keen, and especially millennial, and I think actually not even millennial, generation Z. Wow. You know, you are very much, you know, you think a lot about what to buy in relation with the values of the company, you know, and data show that. But they also show that if your generation figured out that that was fake, it will punish the company, you know, so it will backfire, you know. So it's an interesting thing because now finally, you know, more and more consumers, you know, become more knowledgeable about it, that it would impact directly what business want to do. So now basically, thanks to your generation, a corporation like Moleskine is forced to be smart and ethical in a way or another. You know, it's much easier for somebody in my position to tell the company that this is the right thing to do. So, because data proved that. So basically, to make a long story short, now we have this partnership agreement. You know, that is an ongoing partnership agreement where they gave us 1% of their EBITDA, their earning before taxes. That is a substantial amount of money, but it's not a lot of money, unfortunately, because Moleskine has a big name, big brand, but it's still like a relatively small company. Just to give you a feeling, you know, Moleskine makes around $150 million a year. That is nothing compared to what corporation will make. You know, sometimes they tell you, oh, Adama, you know, you co-founder of the Moleskine Foundation, like Prada Foundation. We're like, yeah, Not really, there's a couple of billions that divides us and them, But, so they do this. We take that 1% for operational cost and also for some programming. But we use that for operational costs because we still have to do fundraising. But when we do fundraising, 100% of what we fundraise externally goes directly to programming without any overhead cost. So if you give us €1, 100% of this euro will go to the programs. It can be AtWork, can be Wiki Africa, can be many other different programs. But it goes straight to the beneficiary, without passing through us. So this is a way, and at the same time, the company, by giving us the name, we also, in the partnership, we also leveraging the infrastructure of the company, to spread the message, as much as possible. So it's a new model that we have developed. In this case, I think it's fairly new because the company gave us the name, but they don't control the foundation. The foundation is completely independent, to the point that with the bylaws of the foundation, nobody who's part of the company can be part of the general council, that is the higher organ of the foundation, that is the one in charge for strategy, hiring, long-term strategy, and so on and so forth. So we believe that, I don't know if you studied it, but Michael Porter, was talking about share value. So the Moleskine Foundation is one of the model that we try to really create pure, and authentic share value between the needs of a corporation that at the end of the day still had to sell, and the will of a foundation is create social change. There is a space in which the two things are not in contradiction. And the foundation want to operate in that space and expand that space as much as possible.
Hi, so I wanted to ask a bit more about the AtWork education system, and what were some of your biggest influences when developing it, and what were some of the most, inspiring moments that kind of shaped it to be what it is today?
There's I would say, the first one, the person that we developed with, that is Simone Jaime, definitely, of course. There are a couple of quotes that always come around, the one about Deleuze that I was mentioning before, I think it was somehow here. About the toolbox, is one of those. We talk a lot about, we use a lot of a sentence, another quote of Hegel that says, we don't know what we know. And it's, I mean, we could expand a lot in this, but it's something that basically stays at the core of the actual program to say, okay, the first thing is realizing that we probably don't know what we think we know, and it's about, again, critical thinking, is about getting out of that box, is about shaking the assumptions that we have, as human beings, and restart building on it, There are many others, to be honest, from James Baldwin. There's, if you had the chance, go on YouTube. There are amazing work. There's amazing speech of James Baldwin talking about education and the way like he interpreted education. There are many. There's a lot that happened also with that I forgot to mention about the artistic process itself. The artistic process itself, because when you look at AtWork it's like making an exhibition from a curatorial standpoint. Justin, in your artistic practice, when you have to get in, artists have these things, and that has this great skills and capacity and luck, and to do this exercise. Before we were in the question like, how can you exercise your creativity? You work on it. You work on it constantly, with knowledge and exercising. And when every time, and I can tell you, like every time Justin has to be in a show, there is a curator that comes to say, new theme, Black Mediterranean, resignification, the Divine Comedy, whatever, Africa remix, whatever. I had a dream. What is your idea? What is your interpretation of it? Justin, take the question, start thinking, make an internal process, filtering through itself, studying, refiltering through it, studying, dealing again, creating a dialogue with the curator and with the peers who are around it, maybe other artists, maybe the people around it. Put it out there, and discussing, go in depth, more and more in depth in that question. And the more you go in depth in that question, the go in depth in himself, and he has to deal with all these things. In the end of the day, though, what happened is that it doesn't remain only there. It doesn't remain just as esoteric experience that only art is there. He has to reconcile this with an object, within an object. And this means that you need to negotiate this with yourself, first of all. And this is exactly what happened in AtWork when you have to reconcile all this with a notebook. But then there is an exhibition connected to it. And that's what you have to do. This means that that negotiation is not only a negotiation to do with yourself. It's a negotiation that you do with yourself at the light of the fact that you're going to be in a public space. And so you negotiate with other people. And the discourse continues. This means not only negotiation, this means also responsibility about the idea that you put out there. And you know that that piece can end up in a collection of somebody forever. It can be out there forever. And you have another level of responsibility and negotiation with yourself. This is something that artists, good artists do. Not all, but good artists do. It's a process that is done constantly. And this is something that we condensed in a way in the AtWork program, in a 5 days experience. So that's also another big influence for that.
We can squeeze in the one last quick question.
Okay.
But we have to ask Adama to be also quick in his response, because
sure,
that's
yeah.
a part of the...
That was mainly my fault, actually. Yeah.
I was wondering what happens after you leave. Is there a continuation? Does the Moleskine Foundation to follow up, and do they communicate with these communities to see how they are fostering this continued creativity and creative problem solving?
Yeah, so the first things, again, is the first part of the answer is connected to the local partners. So we work with partners that are already working in that community and working, it's already within their mission. So AtWork become part of their mission. So they just become something on that. So the follow-up, and it basically starts with them. The second thing is that we have created this online community where all the students of AtWork that experience AtWork can stay in touch and can start new dialogue. And this is extremely important because every time we had the chance to showcase, the students want to showcase, for example, their work, it's a new possibility of dialogue with somebody else. And just to make a quick example, just a few days ago, we published in the community a notebook of a young woman from Uganda, and she made her notebook on her condition as a woman, in Kampala in Uganda, and some of the struggles, some of the difficulties there, and it was a very powerful notebook. And the people who responded were the young women from Cairo, who were having, who just finished the workshop, and starting that dialogue. And most importantly, say like, sister, you're not alone. We're experiencing something similar here. And what we have seen, in this community is that when individuals realize that their problem is not the only their problem, everything changes. So it is extremely important for us to keep, that dialogue on through technology and through our partners.
Thank you, Adama, and thank all of you.
Thank you.